The morning the Hale family handed Owen Doyle a ring of rusted keys and called his daughter's inheritance. Not one of them looked at him while they did it. They were gathered in the long room at Windward, the harborfront house Maren's people had owned since before there were paved roads in Mooring Cove. Owen sat near the end of the table in a chair that creaked when he shifted his weight, still in the only good shirt he owned, the one he'd worn to bury his wife 6 weeks earlier. Across from him, Maren's brother Curtis spoke in the smooth, unhurried way of a man who had never once been told no. Their mother, Adele, sat very straight at the head of the table with her hands folded the way she sat for photographs. "We think it's cleanest this way," Curtis said. "The investments, the Windward property, the trust accounts, those all stay in the family line where the estate planning already had them. And the point, well," he slid the keys across the wood. They came to rest against Owen's coffee cup. "The point goes to Wren. Maren would have wanted that. She always loved that pile of rocks." Owen looked at the keys. 3 of them, iron, scaled with orange rust, the kind of keys that opened doors no one had bothered to lock in 50 years. "You're giving my daughter a lighthouse," he said. "We're giving her a memory." Adele said, "It's worth almost nothing." Owen, "It's falling into the sea. But you always did like playing caretaker." She smiled at him the way you smile at a man you've decided to be patient with. "Take it. It's the one thing that's truly hers." He took it. He had no idea yet what he was holding. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. To understand why a ring of keys would matter more than everything else in that house, you have to understand who Owen Doyle was and who the Hales had decided he was, which were never the same man. Owen fixed boats. He'd done it since he was 16, first sweeping the floor of the Mooring Cove boatyard, then learning diesels, then learning the older work, the planking and caulking and the slow art of bringing a wooden hull back from rot. By 46, he could lay his hand on an engine and tell you what was wrong before he turned a wrench. People up and down that stretch of Hancock County coast trusted him with the things that kept them alive on the water. It was good work and honest work, and it had never once made him rich. Maren Calloway Hale had walked into the yard 14 years before on a flat gray afternoon in April, towing her grandmother's old wooden launch on a borrowed trailer. The launch was named Vivian's Errand, and it leaked, and 3 other yards had told her it wasn't worth saving. Owen had walked around it twice, run his thumb along the seam, and said he could save it if she didn't mind it taking the whole summer. She'd said she didn't mind. She'd come back every Saturday to watch him work, and by August the boat floated, and Owen was in love, and he stayed in love for the rest of her life. The Hales never forgave her for it. They were not cruel to him in any way you could put your finger on. That was the trick of them. Adele would ask after the boatyard at Christmas with a tilt of her head, as though it were a charming hobby. Curtis would introduce him at parties as Maren's husband. "He's very good with his hands," and let the sentence hang there with nothing behind it. They had wanted Maren to marry a man with a name, a man who summered in places, a man whose money matched their money. Instead, she'd married a mechanic, and she'd done it gladly, and she'd built a small, warm life with him in a salt box house 2 miles inland, with Wren and a vegetable garden and a wood stove, and she had been happier there than she had ever been at Windward. The family read that happiness as a rejection of everything they were. They were not entirely wrong. What none of them understood, what Owen himself only half understood while she was alive, was where Maren went when she needed to be most herself. She went to Gannett Point. The point was a finger of granite and spruce that reached out into the cold Atlantic, about 4 miles past the end of the Peninsula Road, 41 acres of headland that her great-grandfather had kept lit for the better part of his life. Asa Calloway had been keeper of Gannett Point Light from 1911 until they automated the station in 1958, and his daughter Vivian after him had loved the place so fiercely that she refused every offer to sell it, and there were many offers right up until she died. Vivian had left the whole of it, light tower and keeper's dwelling in headland and the little cove below, to her granddaughter Maren, because Maren was the only one in 3 generations who still understood why a person would keep a thing that paid nothing. Adele had never forgiven her mother for that, either. The Hale money came from shipping and then from real estate, and to Adele the lighthouse was an embarrassment, A reminder that the family had begun with a man in oilskins climbing a cold tower at 3 a.m. to keep a flame alive. She wanted the point gone, sold, turned into money like everything else. Maren had refused. And then Maren had gotten sick. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in the second spring of Wren's life as a girl who could read on her own. Ovarian cancer. Found late. The kind of late that closes most of the doors before you've even understood you're in a hallway. The doctors talked in months, and then in fewer months. Maren had 16 of them. Owen would spend the rest of his life grateful and furious about those 16 months in equal measure. What he did not know, what he would not learn until the keys were in his hand, and the family had gone home satisfied, was what Maren had done with that time. She had not spent all of it the way he thought. She had spent some of it driving out to the point alone. The will reading itself, the one the family arranged, was a quiet humiliation, and Owen understood every part of it except the most important part. It happened a week after the funeral, at the offices of Prentice and Calder, the firm the Hales had used for 40 years. Mr. Prentice was a soft, careful man who had drawn up Adele's documents and Curtis's documents, and never, it would turn out, a single one of Maren's. He read through the estate with his glasses low on his nose, and the picture he painted was simple and, to anyone in that room, complete. Maren's account, modest after the medical bills, would be divided. Her share of the Windward property reverted to the family holding. Personal effects to Owen and Wren. And then a line about the Gannett Point parcel, real property in Hancock County, which Mr. Prentice read quickly and Curtis explained warmly. "That's the Lighthouse," Curtis said, leaning toward Owen. "Honestly, the kindest thing would be to let us fold it into the state sale. There's interest in the headland. You know, there's been for years. We can get something for it. Split it fairly, and Wren ends up with a real college fund instead of a heap of stone with no roof. Doesn't that sound better than her inheriting a liability she'll be paying taxes on for the rest of her life?" Owen had not slept properly in 6 weeks. His daughter was 10 years old and would not eat unless he sat with her. He did not have it in him to fight a man like Curtis across a polished table. "What do you mean, interest in the headland?" he said. Curtis waved a hand. "Buyers come and go. The Point's the last big private piece on this part of the coast. Deep water, no neighbors. People sniff around. None of it matters if the title's a mess, which is why we'd handle it all through the firm. Clean. Simple." He produced a document, a few stapled pages, and set it in front of Owen with a pen. "This just consents to the family settling everything together. As Wren's guardian, you sign on her behalf. It makes the whole thing painless." Adele said gently, "Owen, you can't possibly want to manage a lighthouse." He looked at the pen. He looked at the pages, which were full of words like consent and release and waiver of interest, and he felt the particular cold that comes when you sense that something is being taken from you and you can't yet see its shape. He did not sign. "I'd like some time," he said. The temperature in the room changed. "Not much. Just enough." "Of course," Curtis said, smiling, and the smile had teeth in it now. "Take your time. Although I'll be honest with you, Owen, there's a clock on the buyer's side, and if this drags, that money walks. I'd hate for Wren to lose out because her dad wanted to read the fine print." He let that sit. "But sure, take a few days. Read it. You'll see it's the fair thing." Adele stood, which meant the meeting was over. She gathered her bag and her coat. At the door she paused and reached into her pocket and tossed a ring of rusted keys onto the table in front of him, the same way she might have handed back something he'd dropped. "Take the Lighthouse in the meantime. Then, if it means that much to you," she said, "God knows none of us want it. Just don't let the girl get hurt out there. It's not safe." Then they were gone, and Owen sat alone in the lawyer's office with 3 iron keys and a stack of papers he hadn't signed, and the strange, unkillable feeling that Maren was trying to tell him something he hadn't yet heard. He drove home and did not look at the papers that night. He sat on the edge of Wren's bed instead, in the small room with the seashells on the windowsill, and listened to her breathe, and he thought about what his wife had loved. In the morning, Wren came down to the kitchen already dressed, her hair in the crooked braid she insisted on doing herself now, and she found her father standing at the counter holding the rusted keys in one hand and a cold cup of coffee in the other. "What are those?" she asked. Owen looked at her. She had Maren's eyes exactly. that same gray-green that changed with the weather. And lately, every time he looked at his daughter, he had to swallow before he could speak. "They're keys to your mother's lighthouse," he said. "Out on Gannett Point. You went there when you were little. Do you remember?" Wren's face did the thing it did when a memory surfaced from very deep down, a kind of slow surprise. "There were birds," she said, "and Mom had a special way up the stairs. She'd count them." 41, Owen said, before he could stop himself. He had no idea how he knew that. Maren must have told him once, years ago, and the number had waited in him all this time. She'd count 41 steps. Wren stared at him. "Can we go?" He had a stack of legal papers waiting on the table, and a brother-in-law with a clock running, and every reason in the world to keep his daughter inside where it was warm and safe and simple. He looked at her face. He thought about Maren driving out to the point alone, all those afternoons in her last year, telling him only that she'd gone for a drive. "Get your coat," he said. "The thick one. It's cold out there even in May." The peninsula road past Mooring Cove turned to gravel after the last farm, then to 2 ruts with grass growing up the middle, and then it ended at a chain gate with sign, so whether the words were gone. One of the iron keys fit the padlock. It took both of Owen's hands and a long breath of rust before it turned. Beyond the gate, the headland opened up the way Maren had always described it, and he had never quite believed. 41 acres of wind-bent spruce and granite ledge, and meadow gone to wild rose and bayberry. And at the far end, white against a hard blue sky, the tower. Gannett Point lights stood 38 feet of brick and lime mortar, painted white once and gone gray with salt, with a black iron lantern room at the top, where the glass caught the morning and threw it back. Attached to it by a covered walkway was the keeper's dwelling, a story-and-a-half house with a sagging porch and windows like closed eyes. Gulls and a few of the big white gannets that gave the place its name wheeled over the cove below, where the water was a deep, clean green. That means real depth close to shore. Owen had spent his whole life on this coast, and he had never in his life seen water like that so near the land you could throw a stone into it. Wren got out of the truck and stood very still, and then she ran, the way children run toward the sea, and Owen had a jog to catch up, and for a moment, the first moment in 6 weeks, the weight on his chest lifted enough to let him breathe. They were halfway across the meadow when a voice stopped them. "You'd be Maren's family, then." An old man had come up the path from the cove, a lobsterman by the look of him, 80 if he was a day, with a face like a cliff and hands swollen by 60 years of pot warp and cold water. He stood leaning on a length of driftwood he used for a cane and looked at them with pale eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Owen Doyle," Owen said. "This is my daughter, Wren. Her mother owned this place." "I know whose it was," the old man said. His voice softened, just at the edges. "Lyle Goss. I've kept an eye on this point my whole life, and my father before me. Knew Asa. Knew Vivian till the day she died. Knew your Maren since she was smaller than this one." He nodded at Wren. "I'm sorry for your loss. She was the best of that whole tribe, and the only one worth a damn, if you'll pardon me saying it. You won't get an argument from me," Owen said. Lyle studied him a moment longer, and seemed to decide something. "She was out here," he said, "last year, more than once. Drove herself out, even when she was poorly, even toward the end when she couldn't hardly walk the path. I'd find her sitting up in the lantern room with a thermos and a stack of papers. I asked her once what she was doing. All that effort, sick as she was, you know what she told me?" Owen's throat had gone tight. "What did she tell you?" "She said, 'I'm setting things so they can't be undone, Lyle. So that when I'm gone, the right people end up holding the right thing, and nobody can talk them out of it.'" The old man's eyes moved to the keys in Owen's hand. "You got the keys, I see. Good. She told me a man would come with the keys, and that man would be the one she trusted. Said his name was Owen, and he fixed boats." Lyle almost smiled. "Guess that's you." Owen looked down at the iron keys in his palm, and the cold feeling from the lawyer's office came back. But it had turned into something else now. Not dread, the beginning of understanding. "What did she set?" he said. "Lyle, what did she do out here?" The old man gestured with his driftwood cane toward the tower. "I don't know the particulars. I'm a fisherman, not a lawyer. But I'll tell you where she sat, and I'll tell you she said you'd know what to do when you found it." He started back down toward the cove, then stopped. "One more thing. Those people, the mother and the brother, they've had men out here twice this past year. Surveyors, fellas in good shoes walking the property line and taking pictures. Maren knew. It's why she hurried. He looked hard at Owen. Whatever you find up there, son, you find it before they do. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The keeper's dwelling smelled of cold ash and salt and old paper. Owen pushed the door against its swollen frame, and it gave with a groan, and the morning light came in behind him across a floor furred with dust. Someone had been living a small, careful life in 2 rooms of this house not so very long ago. There was a kettle on the stove. There was a wool blanket folded over the back of a chair, and when Wren picked it up and pressed it to her face, she went very still and said, in a voice that broke her father's heart, "It smells like Mom." It did. It smelled like Maren, faintly, under the dust, and Owen had to stand at the window for a moment with his back to his daughter. Maren had been coming here, not for drives. She had been keeping this room. On the table by the window there was a thermos, the green metal one Owen had given her years ago, and beside it a single photograph in a small frame. The 3 of them on the day they brought Vivian's errand back to the water, all of them laughing, Wren a baby in Maren's arms. And under the photograph, weighted by it, a letter, the envelope yellowed at the edges, with one word on the front in Maren's slanting hand. Owen. He sat down in the chair with the wool blanket, and he opened it, and his daughter came and stood against his side, and he read his wife's voice out loud, because Wren asked him to, and because he could not have read it silently if his life had depended on it. Owen, if you're reading this, you came. I knew you would. You always came when something needed fixing, and this needed fixing more than anything I've ever asked of you. I have to write fast because writing tires me now, so I'll say it plain, the way you like things said. My family is going to try to take this place. They've been trying for 40 years, first from Graham and now from me. And the minute I'm gone, they'll try to take it from Wren, before she's old enough to know what she's lost. Curtis has debts, Owen, more than anyone knows. He's already promised his headland to people who want to put a resort on it, and he can't deliver it, because it was never his and it was never Mother's. It was Graham's, and Graham gave it to me, free and clear, and I have proof, and I've hidden the proof somewhere they will never think to look, but you will. Asa kept his most important records, where no weather could reach them. Graham showed me when I was a girl. Go up, count the steps the way I taught Wren. At the top, under the floor where the keeper stood his watch, there's a place. Everything's there. The deed. And the thing I made so they can't undo it. Frances will explain it. Frances Pelletier. She did it all for me, and she's waiting for your call. I'm sorry I didn't tell you while I could. I think I was afraid that if I said it out loud, the saying would use up time I want to spend looking at you and Wren instead of at lawyers. That was selfish, and I'd do it again. Take care of our girl. Show her who I was out here, where I was most myself. And keep the light, Owen. Graham always said a kept light is a promise to whoever's still out there in the dark. I'm out there now. Keep it for me. All my love, every bit of it. M. For a long time neither of them spoke. Wren was crying without sound, the way she had learned to in the last terrible year, and Owen pulled her into his lap, though she was getting too big for it, and they sat in the keeper's chair in the cold room while the gulls cried outside. Then Wren wiped her face with the heel of her hand and looked up at him, and her mother's eyes were fierce now. She said, "Count the steps," Wren said. "Come on, Dad." She left it for us. The stairs wound up the inside of the tower in an iron spiral, and Wren counted them out loud as she climbed, her voice steadying with each number, and at 38 the spiral opened into the lantern room, where the great glass lens still sat under 100 panes of salt-frosted window, with the whole green sea spread out below. 41 steps. Maren had counted true. The lantern room had a wooden floor laid in wide boards, worn pale where generations of keepers had stood their watch. Owen got down on his knees and went over them with his palms, the way he'd go over a hull feeling for a soft plank, and near the base of the lens, where a man would have stood the longest looking out to sea, he found a board that gave, when he pressed it just slightly, the give of the thing fitted to be lifted. He worked his fingers into the seam. The board came up. Beneath it, in a dry cavity lined with sheet of oilcloth, sat a metal document box, the gray steel kind, dull with age but sound. Owen lifted it out and set it on the floor between himself and his daughter, and the second iron key on the ring fit its lock, and he opened it. It was full of paper, and the paper was everything. On top, careful and dry, was a deed. Owen had handled enough title work selling and buying his own house, and the boatyard slipped to know what he was looking at. It was a warranty deed recorded with a stamp of the Hancock County Registry of Deeds, dated the autumn of 1998, conveying Gannett Point, so-called, comprising 41 acres more or less together with a light station, dwelling in all appurtenant shore and flowage rights from Vivian Calloway to her granddaughter Maren Calloway Hale, to have and to hold, free of all encumbrance, Vivian's signature, a notary's seal, the book and page number where it lived, permanent and public, in the county records. It had been Maren's alone since before Owen had ever met her. It had never belonged to Adele. It had never been Curtis's to promise to anyone. Under the deed was a thicker document, bound in a blue cover, and the cover read the Calloway Light Trust, irrevocable. Owen turned the pages with hands that had gone unsteady. He understood maybe 2/3 of the language, but he understood the parts that mattered, because they had been written to be understood. Maren had placed the entire Gannett Point property into a trust 14 months before she died. The trust was irrevocable, which the document explained in a plain paragraph someone had clearly insisted on, meaning it could not be changed, sold off, or unwound by anyone, including Maren herself once it was signed, including any family member, including any court-absent fraud. The beneficiary was Wren Doyle until she came of age and beyond. The trustee, the one person given authority to manage and protect the property on Wren's behalf, was named on the signature page in Maren's hand. Owen Doyle. Beneath that, a survey map, fresh, professionally drawn, the property lines crisp, with a surveyor's stamp dated the previous spring. Maren had commissioned her own survey, so there could be no argument about a single foot of the boundary, and clipped to the survey, a typed letter on the letterhead of Pelletier Law, from Francis Pelletier, attorney, with a phone number circled in pen, and 3 words written beside it in Maren's writing. Call her first. Wren was looking at the papers without understanding them, the way a child does, and then up at her father, who clearly did. "Dad," she said, "what is it? What did Mom do?" Owen sat back against the cold base of the lens with the deed in one hand, and the trust in the other, and the wind hummed in the lantern glass, and out the windows the green sea ran to the edge of the world. "She gave you the whole point," he said. "Not the lighthouse, baby. The whole point. And she made it so nobody can ever take it from you. Not your grandmother. Not your uncle. Not anybody." He looked down at the survey, at the deep water cove, at the 41 acres of the last private headland on that coast. The thing Curtis had promised the men in good shoes who want to pour concrete over it. "And she made me the one who keeps it safe until you're grown." He found that he was laughing, quietly, in a way that had tears in it. "Your mother," he said, "your mother outthought all of them. Sick as she was, she outthought every one of them." Francis Pelletier was 73 years old, retired to a gray-shingled house at the head of the cove with a view of the water and a desk still stacked to the affairs of people she had cared about. And when Owen called her that afternoon and said his name, she let out a long breath like a woman setting down something she'd been carrying for a year. "Owen Doyle," she said. "Thank God. I've been hoping you'd find your way out there. Maren swore you would. I'll tell you, I worried." She had him come the next morning, and she sat him down at her kitchen table with the document box and a pot of strong coffee, and she walked him through all of it the way Maren had wanted, plain and slow. The deed was clean and recorded, she said, which meant the chain of title was public and beyond dispute. Gannett Point had been Maren's sole property, conveyed by Vivian, with no claim from the rest of the family, no matter what story Adele told herself or Curtis told his buyers. Francis had personally pulled the records and confirmed every link in the chain before she drafted a word. The trust, she said, was a harder thing she'd built, and the stronger. She had made it irrevocable on purpose, at Maren's specific and repeated insistence. Even after Francis warned her it meant she was giving up control herself. She said, "I don't want control, Francis. I want it locked. I want it so that when I'm too sick to defend it, it defends itself." Francis took off her glasses. "I practiced law on this coast for 50 years. I have rarely had a client see so clearly what was coming for them. She knew her brother. She knew her mother. She built a wall, and she put your daughter behind it, and she made you the gate. Curtis told me, Owen said slowly, that there were buyers, that there's a clock. He had me half believing I'd be cheating Wren out of a college fund if I didn't sign his consent fast. Francis's face hardened. I know about the buyers. Vesper Coastal, a resort group out of Boston. They've been after the headland for 3 years. They want to put up a 40-room hotel and a marina in that cove. They offered $9.2 million for the parcel. She let the number land. Curtis Hale signed a letter of intent to deliver Gannett Point to them last fall. He took a deposit against it. The trouble is, Owen, he doesn't own it, and he never did. And now he's into Vesper for money he's already spent against land that belongs to your 10-year-old. That consent form he put in front of you, that was him trying to make himself an honest man at your expense, by getting you to hand over what was never his to sell. She tapped the trust document, and he can't because of this. The day Maren signed this, she made it impossible. That's why he's in such a hurry. He's not racing a buyer's clock. He's racing his own ruin. Owen sat with that for a while. $9.2 million. The pile of rocks Adele had tossed across the table at him with 2 fingers. The lighthouse worth almost nothing, falling into the sea, the one true thing that was Wren's. What happens now, he said. Francis poured him more coffee. Now you decide what you want, because for the first time you're the one holding the cards, and you have to understand that completely. You're the trustee. You control the most valuable single piece of coastline in 3 counties, in trust for your daughter. You can sell it if you think that's best for her, to Vesper or anyone, for an enormous amount of money, and no one can stop you. Or you can refuse to sell it. Keep it exactly as it is, and no one can make you. The choice is yours and only yours. That's what Maren gave you along with the keys. Not just the land. The choice. She trusted you with the choice. Owen looked out her kitchen window at the cove, at Gannett Point, a green line in the distance with its white tower catching the sun. Keep the light. Owen, Maren had written. A kept light is a promise to whoever's still out there in the dark. I think I already know what I want, he said. But there's a conversation I have to have first, with her family, before they hear it from anyone else. Francis almost smiled. I rather thought you'd say that. Would you like me there? No, Owen said. I'll bring the box. They should hear it from me. He called Curtis that evening and said he was ready to talk about the consent form, and could the family meet at Windward the following afternoon. He could hear the relief in Curtis's voice, the assumption of victory, the warmth that came back into it now that the mechanic had apparently come to his senses. Of course, Owen. Smart man. 2 o'clock. We'll have the papers ready. Owen said 2 o'clock would be fine, and he hung up, and he sat down with Wren and explained to her, carefully, in words a 10-year-old could carry, exactly what her mother had done and exactly what was about to happen. Are they going to be angry? Wren asked. Yes, Owen said. He had decided long ago that he would not lie to her about hard things. Your uncle especially. He's done something he shouldn't have, and tomorrow he finds out it didn't work. Angry men say ugly things. I need you to do something brave. I need you to come with me and just be there, and let me do the talking. And remember the whole time that none of what they say changes what your mother decided. Can you do that? Wren thought about it the serious way she thought about everything now. Mom would have gone, she said. She wouldn't have let them do the talking. Owen looked at his daughter, and there was Maren, all of her, looking back. No, he said, she wouldn't have. Get your good coat. The long room at Windward was exactly as it had been 6 weeks before, the same polished table. Adele at the head sitting straight for the photograph that wasn't being taken. Curtis with the consent papers stacked neatly at Owen's place, and a pen laid across them. Mr. Prentice, the lawyer, was there too, looking faintly uncomfortable. Wren sat close to her father with her hands folded in her lap, 10 years old and very still. I'm glad you came around, Curtis said warmly. I know it's a lot, all at once. You signed these, and we'll have Wren share an account by the end of the month. You're doing the right thing. Owen did not sit. He set the gray metal document box on the table between them with a small, definite sound, and he opened it, and he began to lay the papers out one at a time. Face up, the way you'd lay out evidence. The way you'd lay out tools before a job. Before I sign anything, he said, I want to make sure we all understand what we're signing about. So I'll go slow. I'm a slow man, you've all said so. He laid down the deed. This is the deed to Gannett Point, recorded at the county registry in the fall of 1998. It conveys the whole 41 acres, the tower, the dwelling, the cove, all the shore rights, from Vivian Calloway to Maren Calloway Hale. Free and clear. That's 26 years ago, Curtis. The point was your sister's, alone, before you and I ever shook hands. It was never your mother's. It was never the estate's. There was nothing to fold into anything. Curtis's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. That's the chain of title. There is more complicated than you understand. Owen, Mother and Maren had an arrangement. The family always treated the point as a shared holding. There's no arrangement in the records, Owen said. I had it checked by Francis Pelletier. The name landed in the room like a drop plate. Adele's hands unfolded. Owen laid down the blue-bound trust. This is a Calloway Light Trust. Maren signed it 14 months before she died. It's irrevocable, which I had to have explained to me. And what it means is that nobody can change it. Not your mother. Not you. Not a court short of proving fraud. And there isn't any. Maren put the entire property into this trust for one person. Her daughter. He set his hand lightly on Wren's shoulder. And she named one person protected until Wren's grown. Me. He laid down the survey last, the crisp lines, the surveyor's stamp. She had it surveyed herself, the spring before she passed. So there'd be no argument about so much as a foot of it. She was dying, and she drove herself out to that cold point alone, and she sat in the lantern room with her thermos, and she set every one of these things so they could not be undone. Lyle Goss watched her do it. Owen looked up, and he looked at Curtis directly, and there was no anger in his voice, which somehow made it worse. She knew, Curtis. She knew about Vesper Coastal. She knew about the letter of intent you signed last fall promising those people a headland that belonged to your niece. She knew you'd taken their deposit. She knew you were going to come for it the minute she was in the ground, and she built a wall you can't get over, and she put Wren behind it, and she made me the gate. That's why she hurried. That's the whole reason she spent her last good months on lawyers instead of on us. His voice caught for just a moment, then steadied. So no, I'm not signing your consent. There's nothing to consent to. There never was. The room was absolutely silent. Mr. Prentice cleared his throat and reached for the deed, read it, reached for the trust, turned 3 pages, and went pale. He set it down very gently, the way you set down something you've realized is live. Curtis, he said quietly, this is properly executed. This is recorded. This isn't something we can work around. Read the trust deed clause, Adele said. Her voice had gone flat and strange. Read the part about Vesper. There's nothing about Vesper in the trust, Owen said. Maren never knew the company name when she drew it. She just knew it would be someone, and she made it so it could be no one. The Vesper part is yours, Curtis. The deposit's yours. The debt's yours. The land was never anybody's but Wren's. And that was the moment the smooth man came apart. It did not happen the way Owen had braced for. There was no shouting. Curtis simply sat down hard in the chair behind him, as though his legs had gone out, and he put both hands flat on the polished table and stared at the deed. And when he spoke, his voice was nothing at all like the voice that had introduced Owen at parties for 14 years. I'm into them for $2 million, he said. To no one. To the table. The deposit spent. I borrowed against the sale to cover. I covered the borrowing with more. The whole thing only works if the point sells. There's nothing else. The Windward income's been gone for years, Mother. I've been covering it. I've been covering all of it. I just needed the one sale, and it would have all come right. He laughed, a horrible sound. She knew. She was lying in that bed with tubes in her arm, and she knew exactly what I was going to do. She knew you for 44 years, Owen said, not unkindly. Of course she knew. Adele had not moved. She was looking at the deed, at her own mother's signature on it. 26 years old. And something was happening in her face that Owen had never seen there before. The careful composure she sat for photographs in coming slowly, terribly apart at the seams. My mother gave it to her, Adele said. Not to me. To her. Yes, Owen said. I asked her not to. I begged her. I told her the family needed it. That the keeper's house was an embarrassment. That nobody in this century should have to explain that their people kept a light for wages. Her voice rose and cracked. And she looked at me and she said I'd never once gone out there to find out why anyone would keep it. She said Maren had. She said she was leaving it to the granddaughter who understood. A long breath shuddered through her. I have spent my whole life trying not to be the daughter of a man who climbed a cold tower in the dark for the government's wages. And it turns out that man was the only person any of us ever produced that my own mother thought was worth being. She put a hand over her mouth. Wren, who had been so still, so brave, slipped down off her chair. Owen reached for her, thinking she meant to come to him. But she didn't. She walked the length of the long room to the head of the table, to her grandmother, and she stood there and looked up at the old woman who had thrown 3 rusted keys at her father 2 fingers at a time. Mom kept it because of the birds, Wren said, and because the water's so green, and because Asa was the only one who stayed up all night, so the boats wouldn't crash. She considered her grandmother very seriously. She told me he wasn't an embarrassment. She said he was the bravest one. She said you just never got to see it. Adele Hale looked at her granddaughter, her dead daughter's gray-green eyes looking back at her out of a 10-year-old face, and the last of composure went, and the woman who sat straight for photographs put her face in her hands and wept in front of all of them for the first time in anyone's memory. What happened to the rest of them, Owen would learn over the following weeks, was the kind of ending the world hands out instead of the kind the heart wants. Curtis Hale's arrangement with Vesper Coastal collapsed the moment the company's lawyers saw the recorded deed and the irrevocable trust, and there was no resort and no marina and no $9.2 million, because there had never been a headland to sell. Vesper sued Curtis for the return of their deposit, and the suit pulled the thread on everything else. The borrowing against borrowing, the years of quietly draining the family accounts to keep up the front. By the end of the summer, Windward itself was listed for sale to cover what Curtis owed. The harborfront house the Hales had held since before there were paved roads, sold to strangers from away to pay the debts of a man who had gambled on land that was never his. Curtis did not go to prison. The lawyers worked something out, but he left Mooring Cove and did not come back, and the smooth voice that had introduced Owen at parties for 14 years was not heard on that coast again. Owen did not gloat. He had no taste for it, and Maren would have had no patience for it. When Francis asked him carefully whether he meant pursue Curtis or the family's overreach, for the consent form he'd tried to slide under a grieving man's pen, Owen thought about it for a long time and said no. Maren built the wall so she wouldn't have to fight him, he said. I'm not going to climb back over it just to throw rocks. The land's safe. Wren's safe. That's what she wanted. The rest of it can fall the way it falls. Adele was a different matter, and Owen handled her the way you handle a thing that is finally broken open, which is gently, because there's no profit in stepping on it. She came out to the point. Eventually, on a still morning in late June, an old woman in good shoes that were wrong for meadow, and she stood at the base of the tower and looked up at it for a long time, and then she let Wren take her hand and lead her up the 41 steps, count them out loud the way Maren had taught her, to the lantern room where her own grandfather had stood his watch for 47 years. She came down with her face wet and change, and she did not say much, but before she left she found Owen by the truck and said, "Thank you for not making it worse for me than it already is. You'd have had the right." Owen said there was no right in it that he could see, just a girl who'd lost her mother and could stand to keep a grandmother, if the grandmother could learn to be one. Adele said she thought she could learn. She came back the next month, and the month after, and slowly, clumsily, in the years that followed. She did, but all of that came later. The thing Owen did first, the very first thing, before the lawsuits and the sale of Windward and the slow thaw of the old woman, was keep the light. He went out to Gannett Point with Lyle Goss on a calm evening at the end of May, the two of them and Wren, and Lyle showed Owen the old gear in the lantern room, the lens and the mechanism, what the Coast Guard had pulled when they automated the station, and what remained. The original light was long gone, but Owen Doyle had spent his whole life making dead things run again, and he stood in the lantern room with his hands on the coal brass, and he understood it the way he understood an engine, and he said he could make it shine again if it took him the whole summer. It took him the whole summer. He worked the boatyard by day and drove out to the point in the long northern evenings. And Lyle came and sat in the keeper's chair and told him stories about Asa and Vivian. And Wren learned to hand him tools the way her mother had once handed him tools across the hull of Vivian's Errand. And a kind of life began to rebuild itself out there on the headland, slowly, plank by plank, the way the boat had. They mended the porch. They cleared the path to the cove. They fixed the swollen door, so it shut clean. Wren claimed the small room where her mother's blanket still smelled, faintly, of Maren, and put her own seashells on the windowsill there, too. On a clear, cold night in early September, with Wren in a borrowed slicker and Lyle Goss leaning on his driftwood cane and Francis, Pelletier, come out to watch, and even Adele standing at a careful distance with her arms wrapped around herself, Owen Doyle climbed the 41 steps to the lantern room of Gannett Point Light, and threw the switch, and the lens caught and held and sent its beams swinging out across the dark Atlantic for the first time in 55 years. Down on the headland, his daughters shouted, a pure wild sound, and the white beam swept over the meadow in the cove, and the wild rose and the bayberry, and out to where the water turned from green to black, to whoever was still out there in the dark. The point was not for sale. Owen had decided that the night Francis laid out his choices, and nothing had moved him from it since. He'd had offers. Plenty of them once word got around what the trust contained, and he turned every one of them down the same way, politely, completely. In time, he and Francis arranged for a permanent conservation restriction on the land, so that whatever happened, whoever held it after Wren's children, Gannett Point would stay wild and the light would stay kept. He put it in writing. He made a wall of his own, around the wall Maren had made, and he put the whole green headland behind it, and the Gannets, and the deep clean water, and the small room that smelled of his wife. People asked him sometimes why a working man would lock up the most valuable land on the coast instead of taking the money. He never had a long answer. He'd say his wife had asked him to keep a light, and a kept light was a promise, and a man kept his promises or he wasn't much of a man. Most people nodded at that even if they didn't fully understand it. Lyle Goss understood it. So did Wren. There's a photograph Owen keeps now, on the windowsill of the keeper's dwelling, beside the older one of the three of them on the day they brought the boat home. He took it himself with a timer, the autumn after the light came back. In it he's standing at the base of the tower with one hand on the white brick, and Wren is beside him, taller already, with her mother's eyes and her mother's stubborn braid. And behind them the lantern room is lit, and the sea is going from green to black, and the whole 41 acres of headland that everyone had called worthless is holding the last of the light. He stands where Asa Calloway stood, and where Vivian stood, and where Maren sat alone with her thermos in her last good months, setting things so they could not be undone. He keeps the light burning on the schedule the old keeper kept. And on the calm nights, when Wren is asleep in the small room and the beam is swinging steady out over the water, Owen Doyle climbs the 41 steps and stands in the lantern room and watches the dark. And he does not feel alone out there, because the promise is kept and the light is lit, and somewhere out past the green water and the black, he is certain his wife can see it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.